started the review because I realized that poetry was a superior genre. The mother of all arts, really, and I have this fondness not only for poetry but for mythology. I think mythologists were the first poets, and poets are natural mythologists, and we're just awesome at telling stories and lifting the world up. So I decided I would do something about it and create a review to honor poetry, the mother of all arts. So yeah, here
it's
I am.
Beautiful too. I mean, when I was just looking at the site and everything, it's a very nice work.
Thank you. There's a lot of love.
And I'm totally there about with what you just said, you know, and mythology is definitely one of my main themes.
I saw it, yeah.
And I think part of my work or mission, I think, is to sort of help to, I mean, we need to come together as a world, you know, and we need to learn about all the cultures and mythologies and histories and everything, and cherish and honor and celebrate all of that. And at the same time, we have to realize everybody lives on this little blue earth. That's all we got. So,
yes,
so we better work together.
Yeah, that's all we got. And how did you realize you were a poet?
Well, so I've known that I was a poet for a long time. I was, I think, I was like 15 years old when I made that career choice. And it's
wonderful, very early.
Oh, obviously you did it for the money too. No, and then I soon found out that, I would have to have many jobs along the way as well. Yes. I didn't do a academic path. Many poets, do an academic path, and then but I think there's, I don't know. I'm not sure that academic poetry is necessarily the
yeah, I agree.
I kind of like the poetry from the streets and the people, who, so, I mean, let's see, that's 45 years ago. And I worked all these jobs, lived a life, raised a family, did all kinds of things. And that gave me a lot to write about. So, but I still feel, I mean, that's another thing about like hearing people read their work in the various groups, people from all different parts of the world and different backgrounds and everything. And then you just realize how, your little slice of it is just a little bit of what there is. And so be curious, open up and learn.
Did you notice anything in your sensitivity or your perception that's related to the fact that you're a poet?
In my sensitivity, well, I mean, so I'm observing, right? Yeah. So, and I also write longer prose as well, which is one of the reasons I'm not doing the Roarshock page right now, because I wanted to be able to work in longer forms and stuff like that. But just a poet or any kind of a writer, and probably also a photographer, probably, or any kind of art like that. The observer, and then of course then it's you tend to get involved as a subject as well, or whatever, or how you interact with your right? That's the limits of objective reality, because we always we always affect it, whatever situation we're in, just by being in it. So.
Yes. The reason I asked you this is because my question was probably not that clear, is because I noticed that reality is hard on poets. I mean, it's tough for us. Poets, another epiphany that I had that also prompted me to create the review and talk about what it means to be a poet, what it is to be a poet. And that one day I realized that we were just, a lot of us died in absolute poverty, abject fame for some of us. Like I'm thinking of Baudelaire. Baudelaire to me is just the epitome of what can happen to a poet. It means that even if you become famous, your life is going to be horrible. He had to suffer a trial because he wrote poetry in a very what's the word?
He offended the sensibilities of the bourgeoisie.
Yes, he offended the sensibility of people. Yeah. At the time. So I said, okay, so either you die and no one cares about the poetry you're channeling, you're just, trash, or people think you're an absolute genius, which is true, even when people don't notice you, and your life is crap anyway. So I became very obsessed with that question, and it's a philosophical obsession for me, and I acknowledge that it's a problem that I'd love to solve. I know maybe I will never be able to solve it. I will never be able to understand why poets die like that, live like that. But I think it's not right. It's not right because we are culture, and humanity thrives on culture.
If you think about it as at least part of it is being a conduit for the muse or whatever, or for that energy and that inspiration to flow through, that's a burden. That can be a burden, and I mean, a lot of people seem fairly happy without it, who are not afflicted with poetry. But if you are, and what are you going to do? I don't know, hope for the best, I guess. But it's definitely a difficult path, and it definitely has been very hard on a lot of people. And some of the greatest, like you say, Baudelaire, some of the greatest poets had the toughest road.
Some of them became just absolutely mad. William, who for me was an utter genius. We don't know if, I'm not sure it was that mad, but something happened to him, I think, besides the mystical aspect of his craft. I think that at some point it just snapped, because no one was getting it. It's like no one was getting it. It was channeling these beautiful poems and beautiful mythologies. The guy even channeled mythologies. And
yep, he sure did. I think for me, like, one of the things about Blake in particular, it seems to me like he was a fellow who was he was born at an awkward time for his particular genius, and he seemed I know he had a small circle of artists and friends and stuff, but they didn't have a scene really, too much. So I think they were really isolated, at least as much as I know about the life of Blake. But I mean, just a burning vision, and I believe they were they lived that life of poverty pretty much too.
Yes.
And yet, 90% of the people who were alive at the same time he was, no one ever remembers or thinks of or anything, and Blake's work survives.
And it's like we're always it's not that we're not at the right place at the right time, it's just that maybe we're ahead of time.
Yes.
Rimbaud, who I'm sure Rimbaud wrote beautiful things about being a poet, and he said that the poet is a seer, but also someone who has to détraquer ses sens. I don't know how to say it. He has to come up with a, deranged senses to extract truth and beauty and the essence of being. Yeah, this may be too much for a human psyche, which is something very frail. And
I've certainly known poets personally, and also through literature and stuff, that had pretty serious mental health issues,
yes,
part of it. So
yes.
I don't know if they necessarily go hand in hand or whatever.
I don't know. I tried. I'm writing a book about it. So I wrote the Poetical Manifesto because I wanted to, it was me. I needed to vent, I guess, or I don't know how to say it, but I was angry, but it's sort of a quiet anger. I don't have hatred for all the sister and brother poets who died. I mean, for those who contributed to their death in such horrible conditions. But I was just, I wanted to express something, and it came out as the Poetical Manifesto. Fine. Now I'm doing something that's more, that's quieter. I'm trying to reflect. I'm trying to think about this problem as a philosophical problem, a metaphysical problem we can find a solution to. And what I came up with is that I think other people cause us to be like that.
Mm.
They trigger a sense of strangeness in us. It's like we don't belong to humanity. They treat us like that. And we don't feel that way. In fact, we feel the exact opposite. We feel that we are humanity. We are completely one with it. And the others, they look at us and they say, oh, okay, you are intense, but you're weird, so it's too much. Your emotions, the flamboyant you, it's too much. And so this alienates us. And after that, we only have, this huge sense of loneliness, this huge loneliness that we need to deal with. And we don't know how to, because we're just humans. I mean, we need people. So the experience of loneliness is just awful, and we die out of it. So it's
that is very often the condition of the poet. And so I don't know, have your family, people that you love, and you just have to hold on to them, and hopefully people who who love you will cut you a bit of slack on being weird, being a weirdo poet.
Yes.
Sometimes they do. Lucky, sometimes they don't.
Sometimes they don't. If you are lucky, were you lucky? If it's too personal, that's fine. Don't answer. But were you lucky enough to have people close to you understand your sensitivity and your unique perception, and just letting you live your life and even supporting you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think that is a great stroke of luck, and
that's great.
And then of course also maybe you don't have that your whole life, maybe you have, but if you can just not get too deep into that loneliness and then the despair and that can come out of that, because that's what can drag you under, and then you can drown, and
yes
you need to be able to come back up. And if you have somebody to give you a hand, or mixing the metaphors there, but definitely it's good to have people around, even though we tend to be solitary as poets, perhaps even more than ordinary people.
Yes,
but we still need to have a support system of love, if we can at all have that.
You're right. You're right. Because we need to be with ourselves. Sometimes we push people, we push them because to create, we need to be just,
yeah,
it needs to be
definitely.
just
It's a
us.
very,
So yeah, it's very ambiguous.
that's the problem of all writers, I think, especially probably other artists too, but writers in particular. It's such a solitary, craft, and it's tough. So it's not easy. I mean, unless you have to do it.
Yeah.
If you feel that you have to, because that inspiration is flowing through you, the muse needs to be expressed. So
yes. And how does the muse express herself through you? How does a poem come to you?
Sure. Yeah, there's different doors that they come through, and different roads that they arrive on. Sometimes it could be a little footpath, sometimes it could be a big highway, right? But and some things, some poems just all just flow right out. I mean, they write themselves practically. And then other ones, maybe a few ideas, and then I will there's more craft involved there. You have the idea, but then you there's more effort in actually writing the words and the language that expresses that idea, or what have you. I have a few poems that are longer ones, and they're written over time, and that's kind of that's interesting too. So yeah, I guess to answer the question simply, sometimes they just are right there and just write it down before it slips away, and other times they're work of diligent craft and take a lot of time and effort, and they're always, though, and I find this as I get older, they're always subject to polishing, even ones that came out as pure inspiration as the poet, because then I have two roles, the poet and the editor, right? So, and I always I can adjust them. I've done some of my old poems I've updated in the last year or so to more reflect current situations, and that's another thing too. You want to be able to be current and relevant to what's happening now, but you want to also be timeless, right? You want something that's somebody will be able to pick it up years from now and feel that feeling.
I had a conversation once with a poet, a great conversation, and she's a really a brilliant mind, and she's a Canadian poet, and she told me that poetry happens to her, which I found what was already a very poetic way of saying it. What did you mean? It happens.
It happens,
to you?
yeah.
And yes, it happens to a lot of us like that. So it's like you have chunks of verses that are they're ready, and you feel them. It's not that you see them, it's you feel them. And sometimes what I find really puzzling and beautiful with poetry, and this convinces me that poetry is otherworldly and it's a divine experience. It's just that the poem already has his own musicality. This is so wonderful. It's just, I'm in awe each time that happens. And I said,
me too.
This is God. It's not possible. Or someone from his realm or realm, I don't know. Like, there's the music in it. And so you feel the music and you go like, oh, okay. So the rhymes are there. And it doesn't happen to, it happens to poets only.
Yeah,
So
it's yeah, and I know I've like amongst the many poets that I've been listening to,
yeah,
some poets work very within very formal forms, right? They're very formal forms of poetry, and so then they construct their poem to fit within whichever format they're using, and I've hardly ever do that. It's almost all, I guess you call it, free verse. Most of my
yes,
poems,
yes,
um, you know, and but and this is one of the things I've noticed going back and reading them and stuff. They have, if it's a successful poem, even if it's a free verse thing, it's going to have its own rhythm, its own structure, its own, you know, uh, sense of itself.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
and
It's
I might not even be aware of that when I wrote it, but then I look at it later and it's like, oh,
sure.
that's nice. So,
Sure, sure. I had a moment in my life where I channeled a lot of poetry, and I came across a few poems that I wrote from this moment of my life, and I was like, did I write this? I didn't remember. I couldn't remember.
right,
The poem felt so not me. So
right,
not
right.
me. And yeah, and I said, oh, and these moments are really beautiful too, because,
Yeah,
well, they just show that there's so many dimensions in us, right? And we're not always aware of them, but sometimes they grab hold of us and they say, okay, come on, now this has to come out. And it's really a beautiful experience. Yeah,
it sure is.
yeah,
And yeah,
yeah.
where did that come from?
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. Thank you, David. Where do they come from? Where do
I have
poet
a,
poems
I don't know
come
if you've heard
come
this
from?
one, but I have a poem on that subject where I don't know if you've heard me read it, but it's basically, the
Yes,
title is
I
A Poem
remember.
Unbidden.
I
And it's like,
remember.
what's this poem doing here? You know, and
I
it's like,
remember. Yeah, yeah. They're just they're
I'd
hanging.
rather watch the football game, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Down the right.
I have a few friends. One of them is a monk he's a Hindu monk in Hawaii. And my other friends are just, meditators, just like me. And so the Hindus, they're just awesome people. And so for them, we're surrounded, not only surrounded, but within us, there is many layers, many elemental layers of, I don't know, divine stuff. I don't have the words in English for it. And so um, poetry could be something, I mean, it could be a layer of our being.
I totally understand what you're
Which
saying
is,
because I
yeah,
have
which is just,
direct experience with some of those layers.
yeah,
So
yeah, which is
yeah.
just the awesomest way of talking about this. Yes, it is. It has to be a layer of our being, because how to explain that sometimes we have these breakthroughs, and they happen at weird moments sometimes. You're
Definitely.
under the shower, or you're driving, or I don't drive, but um I
On
suspect
the
it can
bus,
happen when
whatever.
you drive. Yeah. When you cook, when you're exercising, and suddenly you have a poem coming to you. So it's just, yeah, it has to be part of our being. What's what is still a source of mystery to me is, why do some of us are able to experience that and to, give way to this poetic dimension of being, of life, and most humans don't or can't. It's just, I
That's a
don't get it.
yeah. Well, um, And the ones who don't get it, they're not asking that question.
Absolutely.
It's not a concern of theirs.
Yeah, it's not.
So I guess if you are in that situation, then it's it's a gift and or a burden,
Yeah,
I guess. And but it's something I don't know if you're ever going to get to the bottom of that question.
The first mystical experiences that I had them when I was in the north of France, and I attended it was a ritual, a Hindu ritual. I haven't never seen anything like that in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And people were chanting mantras. Okay, so now I know that mantra is poetry, and now I know it. But they were chanting mantras, and I wasn't there anymore. I mean, I was there, but I wasn't there. It's like I was everywhere. And the chanting and the voices and the sounds, it was so powerful, so beautiful. And this is also one of the defining moments of my life as a poet. And so this is the reason why I truly, truly believe that there is a link between the mystical or religious experience, whatever you want to call it, or this experience of the absolute and poetry. Mm-hmm. It's like poetry is a doorway to it. It doesn't necessarily ground you into it, but it's a doorway. I suspect the masters of spirituality can do something. They ground you into that experience, and they are master poets to me. They don't need the word anymore. They're doing this with something else. But yeah, it's just this, to me, it has to be divine. And since it is divine, so this is the question that I'm trying to verbalize. It's difficult, but since I suspect that poetry is divine, what does it say of the poet, of his relationship to these dimensions, and of other people?
I think this kind of relates to what we were talking about before. I mean, about why some people, get it and others don't, and most don't. And it's a level of, sensitivity and how open you are. And, I've had those kind of experiences. They can come through all kinds of experiences, like a festival experience, reasons that we're in such a difficult time that people can't gather, for those kind of things. And you really need that when you get the group dynamic going,
Yeah.
We did, when I was around that same time when I was becoming a poet, and my school group was up in the mountains, and we one night we did a ritual. We basically designed as like a project, a whole ritual, right? And we created masks and everything. And it got to this point where there was like a sort of like a drum circle and people doing this, and it got really high.
Yeah.
But it was, and it was basically, we had created our own, and that gave me a lot of, rituals and practices and stuff can be millennium old, go back way into history, or you can make up your own too.
Yes, you can make up your own. Yeah, sure.
And that's a part of the poem too, right? So the poem can be your own expression of those things.
Are there poets or writers or philosophers, thinkers who shaped your poetic sensitivity and consciousness? You talked about Terence McKenna, I guess.
Somebody else talked about him. I know of his work, yeah, but
yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. No, that's all right.
Poets it's intense. It's an intense experience. Yeah. So, who shaped
there
you?
Definitely are. There definitely are. Definitely are. And we also already talked about Baudelaire. We talked about William Blake.
Yes.
Walt Whitman.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about, and then I'm very, very interested and informed by the modernists, like, which is like 100 years ago, and the whole jazz age scene, Paris in the 20s, and just the amazing poetry and art and literature and everything.
Yes.
So Ezra Pound was a great impresario, great poet, and definitely a bit of a crank. And then moving forward, there's more from that era. Then also the era of the beats.
I felt it, yeah.
You know, and so like even back when I was starting out, I had a chance. I saw a lot of those poets read over the years, you know, and so I got informed a lot, learned a great deal, seeing a lot of those great poets read.
Do you want to share your particular relationship with the beat poets with us?
Well, I grew up in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, and so that was going on all around, you know. I mean, and also being observant, I saw that, and so I'm 60 now. So I was a kid in the 60s when the whole counterculture thing was going on, everything, and like my mom and dad, you know, were very, you know, focused on their family or anything. They were not beatniks or hippies or anything like that. But they also, you know, gave me some room. And, you know, I always thought those counterculture people were the best dressed people for sure. And so that's kind of where it started. And then when I got to into high school and stuff, then we'd go to like readings in the city. And pretty soon you know, so I saw Ginsberg and Ferlinghetti and Gary Snyder and Gregory Corso and all those guys play, you know, read in many venues, many occasions, and I learned a great deal.
Right.
Even from, and these could be, you know, vary from like I go to my buddy and I one time we went to see Robert Duncan, who was a great poet of that era. And it was in his full upstairs above this bookshop in Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, and there's like, you know, 10 people. Or go see some packed theater where Ferlinghetti and Gary Snyder are reading, you know, so, and a lot of stuff in between.
Yeah.
So that's probably where I kind of learned how to present myself as a spoken word performer as well.
Yeah. So you consider yourself more of a spoken word performer?
No, not really, but it sort of tracks. Okay. And I usually perform as Roarshock when I do the performance. Part of it was when a lot of this goes back to the first time I went to the Chat Noir at Paris.
Yeah.
So that was the first time I went, was September 2016, and to the open mic, and so, you know, David Barnes signed me up, and then and Mo read, and I read, and then after I read, and Lindsay Gordon came up, introduced himself, said, you need to know about the Angora poets, and he introduced me to David Sawat and everything. So that was sort of, you know, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but that was kind of like got me going with that whole thing. And went back and read again a couple of years later. So I've been read there in Paris a few times and really always enjoyed it. And readings here have been in various venues. Like we used to have read out in the park with my friends who are in bands, Amplified. This friend of mine said she was coming to hear me, and she said, all of a sudden I heard your voice like booming over the crest of the hill with your poems.
Yeah, your voice is something. It's something in itself, I have to say. The way you in French we would say faire corps avec le poème, which is you inhabit the poem. It's like your voice becomes something completely impersonal, and the poem takes over, and it's just, your readings are always just a pure paradise for me. So yeah,
and this has been great. I mean, this whole Zoom renaissance is, you practice, you hopefully get better. Practice, but don't overdo it. Don't read twice a day, necessarily.
Yeah.
At least not every day.
Yeah, spoken word poetry, I consider myself not a spoken word poet. I walked on stage. So when I was in Lille, in the north of France, I had this phase, and I wanted to, I channeled stories and neo-mythologies and poems and stuff like that. And it was a great experience. But to me, it was a brief experience. I did that for a year and maybe less. After that, I felt drained. It was like I was drained of something, and an energy that I wanted to keep for myself. And so I had a lot of energy before I walked on stage. I was supercharged. And when I delivered the poems and the stories, and I was empty. So it took me a week to recover from, the sharing the energy with people, or delivering the poem and the performance. And there's also, we created a stage. I was with my brother and a friend of his, so they're musicians. So we created those performances, and they were great, but it was a lot of organization and petty things. No, I was exhausted. Simply, it was a lot of exhaustion. And
absolutely.
Yeah, and so what I have found about writing poetry or channeling it with the written word is I have the feeling that the energy of the poem is intact. It's unspoiled. And then, I mean, there's no me in it. There's no Muriel and stage fright, Muriel, and our emotions, our desire to control things. It's just the poem. It's just the poem, and it walks through me, and then it belongs to whomever.
But those are different processes, I think. I mean, the creative writing process, that's you got to hone in on that, and then the performance is another level of it, and that can take a great deal of energy. I mean, it can drain.
But some people have that in them. I mean, they're great.
Some people go.
Yeah, they go and they love it, and it's great. It's great. I wanted to talk to you also about mythology.
Yeah.
I saw on your Facebook page that you describe yourself as a mythologist.
Kind of what I was talking about earlier about how the poetry as a means of expressing mythology, and that and the need for us to bring all of our individual myths of all of our histories and cultures and parts of the world, and then have all of those remain intact in their own thing. But we also need a world story. We need a cosmic, myth. And a lot of the trouble in the world is because people's myths aren't big enough to contain what's going on. That's also perhaps the level of sensitivity. So
yes,
a lot of people probably can only handle so much myth inside their head, right? And some of us can, who can see more or feel more, and plus we are channeling it through poetry. So maybe that's part of our task, is to help bring it up. And
yeah.
and people then you have this poem that you wrote and you perform it, and
yes.
all goes well. Somebody gets their mind opened a little bit, or get a little high off it,
But what I have found is that people are they have a tendency, when I say people, it's the non-poets, which is
yeah.
I've been surrounded with a lot of non-poets, which is
poets and people.
Yeah, poets and people. I think I read something, maybe I haven't, but I think I read it already. I channeled a poem whose name is The People versus the Poet. So yeah, this is a very personal experience.
Right.
People who are not poets, but who are sensitive to poetry, I observed that what they love about poetry is the story. They love the story and the emotion. But since they're sort of hooked up on the story, they're having a hard time. They don't get past what's above or beneath the story in the poem, because the poem, it looks like, it can look like a story, but it's much more.
Right.
Or sometimes it's less than a story. It's sometimes you have poems who are just these majestic pieces of philosophy, and it's and so if you're only interested in the story, I think you miss.
And that's right.
Yeah, you miss something.
A successful poem is going to be on those different levels. Yeah. And then even you as the poet, you may not even, there's probably a lot there that you don't even see initially.
Yeah.
I just had that happen to me with one of my poems, and it's the character who's eating everything, and then at the end of the poem, the character goes back to a feast and eats all the poets, right? And somebody said, well, why did he eat the poets? And then I thought about it and I go, well, wow, maybe, and then I never thought of it like that before. I go, well, maybe that's kind of like a metaphor for how society in general treats poets, right?
Yes.
Chews them up and devours them.
Yeah.
But I hadn't even thought of it, because it was just, this poem is fairly straightforward, story kind of thing. But then it's like, wow, I could have that whole other thing is definitely going on as well. And I never even, that was not something that I consciously considered when I was writing that. I can think of a lot of examples of like that and all of a sudden it's, wow, it's almost like I never saw this text before, or I never saw that in it before. So I dig that. I really am enjoying that a lot.
Yeah. And are you always conscious about how much of yourself you put into a poem? Not always.
Not always.
Yeah.
And some of my really personal ones I don't read, publicly, whatever, or only in certain, occasions. I'll read love poems on occasion, maybe if it's Valentine's Day, right? But it depends on how much of my own life I want to put out, or be vulnerable with, or whatever. So, and since I don't know, but then some of the other poems tend to be more general, I guess.
You talked about Valentine's Day and love. So that's the perfect bridge for me. I'm going to talk about poets and love.
Okay, yeah.
Poets and their lovers, poets and the body. What I have noticed, for instance, for Charles Baudelaire, Baudelaire is just the perfect example of that. He's one of the greatest poets who have walked this earth. And what's surprising about Charles Baudelaire's poetry is that his mistresses inspired almost all his poems. And so they're all very carnal. You know, it's always about the body of a woman, and that woman did this to me. And so, and I think it's a common experience in poets. It's like we have these moments in our lives, these phases, I call them phases, but yeah, where we need that. We need to have intense bodily experiences and intense romances so we can channel poetry. To me, it's just an excuse to channel poetry. I'm not sure, I am not sure that Baudelaire was that much into Jeanne Duval or Marie Daubrun. It's just, no, he just wanted, there was just an excuse to channel poetry. And so if it's too personal, please don't answer, that's fine. I wanted to ask you if you went through these moments in your life too, where you needed to have a very intimate relationship with someone, sort of like a fusion, and yeah, to channel poetry, and did it feel right?
Yes, the answer is yes. Yes, I did. Yes, it did. And yes, and women are just wonderful muses for a male poet, you know.
Men too, yeah, of course.
So, and yeah, definitely. So I have quite a few poems that again, we'll see how, you know, they come out once in a while.
I'm not sure we're doing this just to channel poetry, but considering the beauty of those poems, you know, the poems we channel about that particular someone, sometimes they're just breathtaking, they're just beautiful. And I'm sure that subconsciously, this is what we want. We're looking for an excuse to, you know, drink the poison, not the poison, but you know, the beauty in its purest form, which can be, you know, a poison, but that's the cost is huge because it's still poison. And those interactions that we have with our lovers or you know, flesh muses, they cost us a lot, because most of the time there is a story of loss behind this, a separation, a depression, I mean, it's never happy. Poets don't have happy romances, happy love stories. So,
well, everybody's love story has two sides to it, and that's that you wouldn't know if it didn't, right?
yeah,
there's got to have that little bit of bitter to really enjoy the sweet. But I guess, I mean, that seems to be the way the world is arranged. But definitely the muses are, and the muse as flowing through. So we were talking about flowing through you, but also then flowing through the person that you're
through the person.
engaged with.
Yeah.
And then and a lot of those poems, you know, when I would read them to the person, they you know, they were
pleased. Of course.
And the ones that wouldn't please them, I did not read to them.
Yeah.
Put those ones away until
they love it. And I wonder if there is a way to drink the poison without the pain, to channel beauty and truth in its purest, in their purest forms, without, you know, all the pain that comes with it, because the pain is ultimately what either kills our creativity or kills us, because in the end, well, I know we're mortal, but some of us died very early and had very painful lives.
Something to continue to work on, though.
Yeah.
To mull over. The analogy between you know, love and eating, for example. You know, I love you so much I could devour you, you know, whatever.
Yes.
That's what happens to the poets too, right?
Yes.
Whether it's the beast or it's the lovely muse. Yeah. I don't know, Maria.
I don't know.
I think it's going to be something to you know, if you do come up with a concise formula, please share it with me.
I'm working on this, really. I want to try.
I know you are, I can tell.
Shame.
Another thing, I mean, I've noticed if you look at history of poets and other artists and stuff, and you know, they weren't always necessarily kind to their muses or what have you, or you know, and kind of my bottom line is we should always do our best to be equitable and, you know, in our relationships, whatever, you know, be they, you know, muse or whatever, and that helps the world be a happier place if we can do that, you know.
Sure.
So.
If you had a message for a young poet, what would it be?
That's a great question. My message to a young poet would be that if you know that you are a poet and there's nothing you can do about it, pursue your poetry. But try and keep your wits about you and realize that we have to, you know, I mean, we exist in this world, and the world is not designed for us. So we have to be we have to be extra crafty and figure out all kinds of dodges to be able to survive in the world while we're being poets, and then whatever other kind of masks we have to put on or roles we have to play. And then, you know, so I mean, I can be basically a poet since I was 15 and sort of quietly go about my life. And now, you know, I'm being interviewed by you all these years later, right? So it's a long haul. That would be my one line would be, if you're going to do it, unless you're going to be, you know, a very romantic poet who dies very young or whatever, but if you're going for the long haul, it's a long haul, and stick with it. Silamar Beach Meditations. Flying eyeball wings across the sky, the bleached blue sky of April, offset against the white sand. I walk upon this beach in the slow loping gait of many miles to go before I rest my weary bones. I hear the rhythm in the waves, just listening without analyzing, not particularly going anywhere. Understand this is a miracle. Ain't it good to be alive? I rejoice in my poet's vision and regret not the times when demons torment me, or emotions unhinge me, or falsehoods deceive me. For these are necessary parts of the process, and only this ocean is eternal. The irregular rhythm of the waves, the manifestation of cyclic patterns, the diffuse blue light of a warm afternoon inspires one to calm meditations, whilst one would bark at the moon that hangs in the dark sky, and both are reflections of one. Duality is illusion, all the same ocean. In this world of trickery, we trick ourselves. Each of us, Buddha, eating pomegranate seeds. Enjoy the drama, dream of life, the poetry of it, and the ocean shall answer in its answer. That is no answer.